Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to see so many new and familiar faces this evening. My name is Cassandra Parker Nowicki, and I have the great privilege, really, of being the current executive director of the Carver Community Cultural Center here in San Antonio, Texas. And we are so honored to be partnering with Art to Action to present not only this conversation, this particular reflection session, but the entire series. So this is actually our 13th, correct? Our 13th, our 13th reflection session. So we have been gathering in this virtual space monthly for over a year. And shortly before you all joined, we were just reflecting, no pun intended, on what an extraordinary journey this has been. And so we're so grateful to have you with us this evening. They all have been miraculous and wonderful, but this is a very special session because our guest this evening is much beloved everywhere, which is evident by what I'm seeing in the chat and everyone that's joined this evening, but very beloved in San Antonio as she resides here with us. So this has been a journey. As we said, even though these sessions began a little over a year ago, the impetus and kind of the seed of what led us to create this space began several years back. When Andrea Assaf, who is our featured artist this evening and the creative genius of not only this series and the work we're going to explore, but also the founder and executive director of Art to Action, our co-presenters. We started on this journey with this vision of bringing her to San Antonio to present a work which we'll explore in a little bit, and to engage in a really in-depth community, like a year-long community engagement project that will result in the creation of a new work here in San Antonio. And then COVID happened and blew all of our expectations and timelines completely out of the water. As much as it took away, it also gifted us many amazing, wonderful things. And one of those is this series of sessions. So these reflection sessions were born out of a desire to reimagine how we could connect with community when we were not able to gather together in physical space. And so that's how the reflection sessions were born. Another really wonderful gift that came out of this kind of need to pivot and reimagine how we can continue to create work and explore Andrea's work is we were supposed to present her original theater-based work, 11 Reflections on September. We were supposed to present it back in 2019 and had to postpone it, I think, due to COVID. And then we're going to present it this past May, or maybe it was 2020, and then this past May, and also had to abandon the idea of being able to present it in person because of the pandemic. But at that time, we didn't want to just simply postpone again. We're like, no, let's reimagine what this could look like. And so Andrea and her ensemble and a creative team that she put together started down on this journey of how could they reimagine this live theatrical experience into something that could be presented virtually. And so they developed this really stunning, what ended up being just a really beautiful film version of 11 Reflections on September, which, and I don't know if you have the award there with you, Andrea, but actually went on to have this life of its own. So it's making its way around the film festival circuit. Yes, yay. And actually won Best Experimental Feature Film in the Silk Roads kind of sub-festival of the Cannes Film Festival. And I guess we're still hopeful and keeping our fingers crossed that it might actually be screened at Cannes. But in addition to winning that recognition, it's also has been recognized at several other film festivals. So again, something that was born out of a need to respond to the pandemic that really ended up being so much more beautiful and extraordinary than I think we could have imagined. So All of that is to say that this may not be what we intended this residency to look like, but we are so grateful for all of the opportunities that it has presented us. And one of the most special things about this is to be able to share space with all of you from around the world, which we wouldn't have had we just met in San Antonio and just engaged with our own community here. So we're grateful for you being here, really excited for you to learn about all the past successes and the future vision for this project. And then just to spend time with these two extraordinary artists in dialogue this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to my friend and colleague, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Cassandra, and thank you for hosting and being a visionary and flexible leader in these very challenging times. I am Andrea Assaf, and it is really my pleasure to welcome you to the 13th edition of the Reflection Sessions, reflecting on the 20th anniversary. These sessions I think, are very informal. I think of them as kind of a backstage pass, like hanging out in the green room with the artists and getting to hear what we're thinking about, what we're talking about, how we're making work, how the politics of the moment and what's happening in the world affects our work. And so I'll talk with our esteemed guest for the first half or so of our time together, and then we'll open up the conversation and invite you to join as well, as you wish. Each episode will feature an excerpt of the digital film now that Cassandra was just talking about. And then we'll kind of take a deep dive into reflecting on the themes in that piece, as well as the work that our guest artist shares. I just want to note that this is a closed session. We're not live streaming, but we are recording. However, the recording is on speaker view, so you won't be recorded unless you choose to speak, and you're welcome to have your camera on if you're comfortable with that. So this week, as we all know, we have been commemorating and are reflecting on the 20th anniversary of the tragedy of 9/11 and its aftermath. And I'm really deeply honored that we are joined tonight by our special guest, nationally and internationally renowned and award-winning poet, author, and novelist, Naomi Shihab Nye, who happens to be in San Antonio, but I feel like is a poet of the world, whose voice is so important and beloved by so many people across the United States and internationally. I'll say a few words about Naomi, and then we'll start a conversation with her. We're also going to drop her bio in the chat. So Naomi is a poet, songwriter, and novelist who, lore has it, started writing poetry at the age of 6 and has published or contributed to over 30 volumes of work since. Just an incredibly prolific writer. And those works include poetry, young adult fiction, picture books, novels, songs, and Naomi is a recipient of many awards and honors, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Book Critics Circle, many Pushcart Prizes, Guggenheim Fellowship, Lifetime Achievement from the Texas Institute of Letters, and many more. She is currently the Poetry Foundation's Young People's Poet Laureate since 2019. And I couldn't be more honored to have you with us. Naomi, welcome, and how are you tonight?
Thank you, Andrea. I'm so honored to be here with you and Cassandra and our circle here. It is a great honor to be connected to your projects, and I have been a fan for decades of the Carver Center here in San Antonio, so I'm grateful that you connected with them so that we could have sort of this family gathering. I'm only a few miles from them at this very moment. Family gathering around world issues, and that makes it feel somehow more intimate, as if we are speaking from our rooms, our homes, our hearts. I admire you so much, Andrea, and always have, And I think your piece that you did in response to September 11th is purely a masterpiece. So I'm so thrilled that you are being noted in France, and wherever that piece goes, I'm sure it will receive strong, strong response. But thank you for letting me connect to it tonight, just in terms of, you know, a human response to what we've all been living through in this strange new millennium.
Absolutely. There's so much to talk about, and I'm excited to talk about all of it. But I always like to begin these conversations with a little bit of remembering how we are connected. And my memory is not always correct, but what I remember, I think, is that the first time I saw you read, Naomi, was at a Rawi conference at the Radius of Arab American Writers. And also we had the great privilege of being able to include Naomi on a panel for National Poetry Month. I think it was in 2015 here in Tampa, Florida, at the University of South Florida, as part of our Building Bridges program. And if you want to know more about that program, we'll drop a link in the chat. But that's how I recall being connected with you, Naomi. Do you have another recollection?
No, I think you're right. And I love how people sort of spring up, as our beautiful musician friend whose work we shared at the opening of this session, Simone Shaheen, a Palestinian virtuoso musician, said to me this year, "We are one in the arts." And he was referring to all the different projects we had participated in together this year, but also suggesting that we share what we have, we do what we can. And, you know, when you look back sometimes at these events where people met originally, it's as if we were already family and we were just coming together in places where we could exchange our voices, but we'd already been putting our voices out there, sharing them, reading one another, hearing one another. So that was probably where we first met, though, sometime long ago.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning Simone Shaheen and suggesting his music for the opening. He's an absolutely extraordinary musician, arguably the best oud player and violinist, among the best in the world, and literally. And I've had the opportunity to see him in concert, and it's just, one is just transported by his music, and he's the kindest soul also. And so it makes all the sense in the world to me that you two know each other and are connected, and that your work is connected in that beautiful way. I think you may have a story about Simone. You shared with me a story about how Simone Shaheen's music touched you after 9/11.
Yes. Well, his music is riveting, and I urge anyone who has never heard him to just go on YouTube and find one of his concerts or performances anywhere and listen to it, and you will be the better for it. But what happened to me with his music, I'd been listening to him for decades, but after 9/11, in those very fractured and disorienting and sorrowful days that had so many layers to them for Americans, for Arab Americans, for Arabs, for people of all kinds. They were just terrible days in all ways, and feeling lost and as if we had no grounding kind of in everything we had worked for in our lives, to see how violence can erase so much good work, so many precious lives, so many families, so many human beings. Anyway, I'd been feeling pretty bad, as most people were, many people were. And I was with my son, who was little at the time, a teenager, and he wanted to go to a drive-through place to pick up some food before going to some practice. And so reluctantly, I was sitting in this long line of cars, and we had on National Public Radio, and suddenly this music came through. It was Simone Shaheen playing a very simple oud aria. I recognized immediately that it had to be Simone, and it was the first time I'd heard his music since the tragedy of 9/11. And I remember just feeling as if my soul was coming back into my body, like this totally disoriented person was reconnecting with soul. And I remember my son saying, "Mom, drive, drive. The people are honking. Drive. There's this huge gap of cars. Drive." And I would tell Simone about this later and say that I became hypnotized in a taco drive-through, just listening to him and feeling as if it is possible to be restored by a single series of notes, by melody, by all the history of melody. And right away, I knew I had to write a piece that ended up in Oprah's magazine, the O magazine, and it ended up being called "This Is Not Who We Are." Like, this tragedy that had happened did not represent any Arab I had ever encountered in my life, any Arab American, or in fact, all of the artists of the world who would do anything to make this a more beautiful world for all of us to be in together.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, and for writing that piece on behalf of all of us. And that's how you describe experiencing Simone Shaheen's music is actually how, Naomi, how I experience your poetry often, as this restorative, something that is giving us back something that the world is trying to take away, or that sometimes feels lost in who we are as a community. And I'm so grateful for that. I remember, and I may get the title incorrect, but I think maybe one of the first times I saw you read, I got to hear you read this lovely little piece called, to the kind, sweet, gentle Arab man on the corner that nobody really talks about anymore. And it was that kind of reminder that we are not what we see on television. We are not these stereotypes, that is so present in your work, and that I'm so grateful for always.
Thank you so much.
So we're gonna go into the kind of format of this gathering, which is that we share work and talk about it. So usually I start by sharing an excerpt from 11 Reflections on September, and now we get to share excerpts of the digital film that Cassandra was talking about at the beginning. And then our guest artist responds to what we experienced together, and then we'll get to hear Naomi read some work, which is such a privilege, and I'm very excited for. So first, we're going to play a clip from 11 Reflections. The piece we're featuring tonight is called September Arabesque, and it's perhaps one of the more metaphorical and lyrical pieces in the series or in the show. And you may appreciate this, Naomi. This piece was actually written in Emily Dickinson's garden. I'm very influenced by Emily Dickinson, and kind of have a long history of studying her work. And at the time, I was living in Massachusetts and working in Amherst. And I sometimes stopped by the Emily Dickinson Museum in her home. And this particular late September day, I was sitting in her garden and thinking about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And each falling leaf to me became, or seemed to represent, another life lost to these wars. And that became a central metaphor for the whole series and later the show. So in this clip, you will see April Cintroni on oud and vocals by the extraordinary Lubana Al-Kuntar. The digital design is by Ava Alster and sound design by Matt Eaton. And it's about 4 minutes-ish long.
She is purple today, full of lavenders and whites, lingering. Chilly morning. Drying yellow hangs as if relinquishing. Greens fade almost into memory. She is sky, crisp blue as 20 years ago. Without warning, without expectation, the illusion of another normal day. A splash of red bursts above in treetops. It will grow slowly over weeks, spreading until the whole tree is ablaze. This world is not conclusion, quotes the poet on a gravestone slab. A flash of yellow, like sun, flame. A squirrel approaches with acorn, mouth stuffed, threatening gestures. He runs to bury a truth everyone will forget by spring. But something will grow there, beyond his control. One plummets, then three more. A bird startles in a bush. Another drifts, slowly twirling, dancing, lightly catching branches as she falls, trying to remember, to cling just a little longer. Another hangs, quivers, red smears across what once was. Distant, this metaphor nags. Pocks and holes scar surfaces, cut membranes, gnashed, eroding at the point. It's a constant, quiet rain of death. Amidst beauty, sky crisp September, as if normal. All go about their day, not noticing how many fall, how many things are changing, dying, soon barren. And all the fallen, brown, red, yellow, we just step over, step on, ignore, rake, bury, as if no life were lost.
You can see the full film if you'd like to, free and on demand through September 16th. It's being presented as part of the Arab film series by the Arab American National Museum. This week, we dropped the link in the chat, and I'd love to invite all of you to watch the full event, and including a discussion with the vocalist you just heard, Lubana El-Kantar, who's from Syria. So we'd love to share that with you, but I'm going to turn to Naomi now, just for thoughts and responses or reflections on that piece, or what resonates with you in this moment of the 20th anniversary. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you so much for sharing that piece. And what resonates with me first is how mesmerized I am by your voice, Andrea, just as I am by Simone's oud. Just hearing the language come flowing from you, along with Lubana's incredible singing and the music, is an experience of sort of ecstatic openness and love and care and deepest responsiveness. And what you're doing in this piece, which is responding so sensitively, so tenderly to massive disaster, uh, even taking the precious time to mention the squirrel with the acorn. I love the line, something will grow there beyond his control. That continuance of life, always in the perimeters of death, disaster, tragedy, other things continuing. The constant quiet reign of death amidst beauty. How many things are dying? You're talking about these huge, huge sorrows and realities and troubles and depths of woe, but you are giving us through language a place to be able to think about it, to be able to put it in a context that is not simply the flailing of our hands and wailing, as in the old folk tales, everyone beating their hair and pulling, you're giving us language that shapes the trauma and the delicacy of care felt in response and in context. And I admire you so much for being able to do that successfully through the whole piece and through so much of your work, where you are acknowledging the hard realities of trauma that happens, but you are also giving us the wider ground to stand on, the wider lives to be in, the bigger picture. And I think about the different kinds of lenses there are for these disasters, and how for 9/11, there was such, full-blown, full attention to the tragedy, and rightfully so, but nobody could imagine such a horrible thing happening and the way it happened and the visualization of those buildings. I mean, I'm sure many of us wished we had never seen the images because it was so hard to just to put them anywhere. Where do you put that in your mind? How do you think with such images in your mind? So the attention that was given to the horrific tragedy of that violence was huge, but the ability to respond in the way that you have, so artfully, so caringly, so tenderly, I think many people have struggled to do that and have felt confounded by it and heartsick that, we continue as hard as we may work, those of us who've worked in education all our lives, those of us who believe in expressive language all our lives, as hard as we've all worked to try to make connections or give people confidence, be encouraging. At the same time, there will be these things that are almost too big for accommodation in that realm and too big to respond to in some way. So it's as if most of us will be coming at it forever with bits and pieces, little stories or tiny poems relating. I'll read you a few in a minute. Tiny poems relating to other disasters, which are not as much in the public eye or the headlines. But you did something astonishing here to go to such a deep place in response to such a big, horrible thing, and make it new, make it fresh, make it heartfelt in its tenderness and care. I feel your work is work of immense compassion and could be applied. Take the Tulsa nightmare, the Tulsa massacre, which has been talked about and will be talked about more, hopefully, in days to come and in new books that are forthcoming right now. We need to find language that helps us understand what people do to one another and also goes deeper and helps us look at the more unseen tragedies. And I would put Palestine and Gaza in that place. So many people who don't pay attention really can pretend to be ignorant of what goes on in Gaza or what goes on in Palestine every day of the week. And if you know, and if you've been watching it your whole entire life, you are traumatized in a different way by the layering of silence or the obscuring, the eclipsing of those disasters. I was in Tulsa on the day of September 11th, and I was working at a school, a very humane, wonderful school called Holland Hall. And I think it was my third day there. It was supposed to be my last day there. And right before we heard about the disasters in New York and Pennsylvania and Washington, the kids were showing me a project they had done in response to a poem I had written. This is always touching to a poet. You think, oh my goodness, the teachers, the kids have gone farther than I did with the poem, and they've done much more wonderful things than I could ever have done. And we're so grateful to them. So they were responding to a poem of mine, very simple poem in a book called Come With Me for kids, called Torn Map. And I'll just say it really quickly, because I think it relates to how our sensibilities were torn in some way that day. Once, by mistake, she tore a map in half. She taped it back, but crookedly. Now all the roads ended in water. There were mountains right next to her hometown. Wouldn't it be nice if that were true? I'd tear a map and be right next to you. Well, so this little childhood trauma of mine, for which I got in trouble and thrown out of fourth grade, turns into hopefully a positive wish that people could just tear maps when they miss one another and paste them together differently. And the kids had actually done this. They had taken all these old paper maps that their teachers had given them, found in garages, in old boxes, in sheds, and they had made their own beautiful poems. It was one of the most ecstatic child art poem experiences I'd ever been in, where they tear a map and they're with their grandma, or they tear a map and they're back in Guatemala with their birth family, or, you know, it was just all these trips that these kids were taking with their torn maps. It was a beautiful thing. And then right after that, you know, the racing through the halls and tapping everyone on the shoulders and whispering of teachers and, oh my goodness, and you better come look at this screen and don't tell anyone. Now you have to give your big poetry reading. We'll tell you this horrible thing that's just happened, but don't mention it during your big poetry reading. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is horrible. And having just seen those maps, I felt so disoriented to step up to a podium and try to speak and try to say, you know, always positive, hopeful things that I think are important in poetry, knowing that some catastrophes were going on that I knew not of. I knew no details about them yet. So forever for me, the torn map has symbolized how so many maps were torn that day. Maps of families were torn. I just read that very touching interview with the man who was the manager of the Windows on the World restaurant. I think it was in the Atlantic this week. And 79 of his workers were killed that day. People he loved, people he trusted, and how he has spent 20 years kind of putting lives back together, his own life, so many other lives. It was just incomprehensible how much was torn. And as if Arab people had not had enough to contend with already, with all kinds of racism and suspicion and sorrow that had preceded that terrible date, there was certainly a huge upsurge in that kind of negativity to follow. And so many innocent people would suffer, and so many people who had nothing to do with the tragedy would suffer. And so yeah, all the maps were torn and all the lives changed. But what I feel you do in your piece is you respond honestly to the horror of it, but you restore us by giving us context and by connecting us to the gravities of human and animal and earthen and spiritual cosmic experience that is so much greater. Thank you with all my heart.
Thank you so much for that response, Naomi. It's extraordinary to just hear you, how you read it and how you respond to it, and it's a gift because I always think of that compassionate kindness that's in your work, also in the face of so much tragedy, and particularly in the context of Palestine. And it makes me want to share a short story with you, which is that when we were doing the live performance of the full show of 11 Reflections on September, it's always really important to me to do a dialogue with the audience after, so that people really have an opportunity to talk about their responses and to share stories themselves. So it's not only my voice in the space, right? And there was one time that we did it actually here in Tampa at the university, and we happened to have in the audience a retired US military general and some veterans. And we also had in the audience the student leaders of several Arab and Muslim student associations, including a young woman from Palestine who was very active and as just a natural leader in several student groups. And so this dialogue ensued, and they're veterans speaking, and the general stands up and speaks about his experience, 9/11. He was in fact in charge of first responders after 9/11 in New York. And then the young Palestinian student stood up, and she turned, usually when people talk at a talk back after a show, they talk to the stage, they talk to the artist. She was in the front row, and she actually turned her back to me and the other artists and addressed the general who was in the back of the audience. And she said, and she introduced herself as Palestinian. And she said, "With all due respect, General, in Palestine, we have a saying, and that is, your 9/11 is our 24/7. And it was so moving to me that this young, 20-ish-year-old woman had the courage and the moral fortitude to just stand up in an audience full of people and speak her truth to a general. It was just an extraordinary moment, and it made me, and it's moments like that that make me feel this is what we do it for. This is the reason to write poetry, to create theater, to do any of it, is to see these dialogues unfold, to get people in a room together that would never otherwise be in a conversation. And then to respond through the lens of poetry. I love what you were saying about giving us a language. Poetry gives us a new language, a different language that isn't the language of news and facts and trauma, but a language that allows us to respond from the heart and find a new way to talk about these things. And that's what I find so inspiring about your work as well. And so, well, I want to acknowledge one more thing and then turn it over to you to share whatever you would like to share tonight. But we are commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11, but we're also very soon coming up on another 20th anniversary, which is the US invasion of Afghanistan. And as we approach that anniversary of the US's longest war, and concurrently witness the unfolding of more tragedy now, as the US withdraws so messily, and the Afghanistan again falls to religious fundamentalism and authoritarianism. it's just so much to hold these two anniversaries at the same time within a span of weeks, and the Tulsa anniversary that you referred to. So many things to reflect on at the same time. And I wonder if there's anything that you would like to say about Afghanistan, or what you're thinking about these days.
Well, and not to mention that we've all been living through this pandemic as well. So there's kind of a light of catastrophe, right, shining in all ways. When you hear the numbers of people who are dying right now in the United States every day, or in the world every day, and you think about the fact that, if you're feeling safe and secure and steady in your spot wherever you are, that's a pretty lucky day right now, because this millennium is not offering us a whole lot of that feeling. Afghanistan has always been a place of great mystery to me. About 1982, my husband and I were traveling by camelback in the Thar Desert in India, and we encountered an Afghani man in a small town who was one of the only people in that town who spoke English at all. And he sat with us one night. We were all drinking tea in this desert town in the desert, and he said, Thar Desert town. And he said, Afghanistan it's a forgotten place, and it will be one of the world's most forgotten places. And I said, but what do you mean by that? I mean, you're here, you're remembering it. He said, no, it's a place where people will find it easy to forget the culture, the beauty, he went into all these details. And this was before so much had happened that we've seen over the past, 40 years. This is more than 40 years ago that he was saying this. And we went on late into the night talking about that. He really felt that his whole country and civilization was going to fall into some kind of vacuum. And he had come to this most remote place because he wanted to maintain a memory. He was afraid he would be lost if he stayed there in his own place. And this was so haunting to think about later, that you would go to a place where you had not one single brethren from your country, and talk about how your whole place was forgotten, and that the world would manipulate it. I remember him saying that the world wants to manipulate my country and do things to it and take things from it, but it will be lost it'll fall into the crack, into the canyon. And so, Afghanistan, I've never been to Afghanistan. I do have one poem I'm going to read about something a woman told me on an airplane out of Saudi Arabia about Afghanistan. She'd been working there all her adult life, and I wrote it down in her journal, in my journal, what she said to me that night. I think it's so sorrowful that there will be so much backsliding for the girls, for the women, for the people of creative bent, they're just such beautiful people. You see them on the news. You don't have to know any personally. I happen to know a bunch of Afghani kids here in San Antonio who are mesmerizingly beautiful, and longing to be in their place of origin. So you think, here's another tragedy I can't solve, but let's keep remembering that this place has been manipulated by a whole lot of people and is continuing to be manipulated, and the regular loving human lives that people would like to have with their families, with their generations, with their educations, they're not being allowed to happen in a way that seems manageable at all. No, I don't think it was a good idea to spend trillions of dollars doing whatever we were doing there. I think it was a catastrophe. It's obvious it was a catastrophe. I don't think it was okay to go into Iraq and have uncounted civilian deaths and destroy more than we will ever know. It was a tragedy. And anyone who wants to pretend that it was valiant and patriotic and a good thing to do, I just think that's going to be harder and harder of a position to maintain.
History will hopefully tell the truth and won't look kindly, I'm afraid, on US actions in the last 20 years. Well, let's turn to more poetry, and I think we're all excited to hear what you would like to share tonight.
Well, thank you so much. And, I must say also, I'm not a politician. I'm just a humble poet. I have operated in a very humble realm of kids and just human beings all my life. I have no interest in power. I don't understand the hunger for power. Nation building is not a concept that I can really relate to. I'm interested in, kids having enough power to stand up and say their own poem out loud without fainting. That's power to me. So, you think about how we define things. And then often poets are asked, or artists, creative artists are asked, solve this disaster that's been made by politicians and military people and money and weapons. And, I can't even solve anything that's happening in my own state of Texas, where I have lived the longest in my lifetime right now. The idea that, well, so many ideas that are flying around in Texas right now seem so preposterous and outrageous and also backsliding. Maybe not to the same degree as what's happening in Afghanistan right now. And we do need to keep sending our support to every positive endeavor we can in any country, in all these places, supporting the children, supporting the women, supporting the teachers. But I wanted to start by just reading, since your piece is commemorating 20 years since 9/11, a piece that I wrote on the night of 9/11 on the bus that I was taking to get home from Tulsa back to Texas. And I had an experience on the bus that I had never had before, to be the first person really to have an extended conversation with someone who was just getting out of prison. And I was the first person he had a chance to talk to. And we'd never seen each other before, but there we were for many hours together. So this is called Flynn, which was not his real name, but rhymed with his real name, Flynn on the bus. 3 hours after the buildings fell, he took a seat beside me, fresh out of prison after 24 months. You're my first hello. Going home to mom, a life he would make better this time. How many times he'd been swept along before to things he should never have, drink and dope, but now he'd take responsibility. Lawyers had done him wrong, and women too. He thought about revenge. Now he was out. But I'm in charge. I'll think before I act. I don't ever want to go there again. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Somehow, in his mouth, that day, it sounded new. The light came through the window on a gentle-eyed man in a Focus on the Game t-shirt, who had given up assault with deadly weapons. No more, not good. A man who had not seen TV in weeks, secluding in his cell, so colleagues wouldn't trip him up, extend his stay, who had not heard the news. We rolled through green Oklahoma. The bus windows made all the trees look bent, a trick of refraction. Flynn looked at his free hands more than the fields, turned them over in his lap. No snap judgments, no quick angers. I'll stand back, look at what happens, think calmly what my next step should be. It was not hard to nod, to wish him well. But could I tell what had happened in the world on his long-awaited day? What twists of rage greater than we could ever guess had savaged skylines, thousands of lives? I could not. He'd find out soon enough. Flynn, take it easy. Peace is rough. Well, those were actual quotes. He was kind of talking to himself the whole time we were in this bus together, as well as talking to me. And I found out later that these were mantras that he was trained to repeat by counselors in prison, especially right before someone might get out, to keep yourself from becoming hot-headed if you found yourself in a scary situation. And I didn't know that then. I thought just this guy is, he's steadfast. He's making a meditation of good things to remember for all of us. But of course, in the context of the day, which I really didn't even have that much news about yet, since it was only 3 hours after it had happened, and I didn't know what the hell was going on any more than most people who were stuck on buses or out in the world did. It really stayed with me. I mean, I was riveted by his slouching walk toward his mother's home. And he kept telling me he knew his mother was at home cooking all his favorite foods. And I thought, no, she's not. She's watching the television. She's not cooking anything. But I wasn't going to tell him that. And just, I thought about that guy. I mean, he told me his entire name. I could have phoned him. I could have tracked him down. I could have checked up on him. And I thought about doing it for years, hoping that he was okay. But, those are the kinds of materials that poets work with. The single conversation, the single encounter, the one life which is on the brink of becoming better again and going back to a better path, a better life. And so he haunted me. So I put that poem at the beginning of the book of Poems of the Middle East, 19 Varieties of Gazelle, which would come out, I don't know, a year maybe later. But since you mentioned Afghanistan, I'll read this because this is also a correspondent, a communicant on an airplane. So people talk to each other when they're in these modes of transportation in the world, or we used to. I haven't been on one in a really long time, but this was on a plane out of Saudi Arabia. A woman left her original seat and came to sit across the aisle from me. And we were headed to London, and she introduced herself. She was British, and she said she'd been working in Kabul, Afghanistan as a teacher all her life, her adult life. And she had been in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for a conference. And I had been in Jeddah working in some schools with kids of different ages. And so she sat across the aisle and said, everything your country is doing in Afghanistan, this was probably around 2010. Everything your country is doing is a huge mistake. It's a disaster. And it is going to fall apart completely. The minute your country leaves with their military power, everything will fall apart. Within 2 weeks, she said. And I said, within 2 weeks, really? Well, tell me about your life there. I agree. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think war is a good idea. What else should people be doing? What else could people be doing? You live there, you know the place. So this is called What She Said. A woman on a plane said, no, we didn't want their bombs and guns. We didn't want them setting up their own camps, making their own plans, crisscrossing our mountains, dressed in combat gear. Those helicopters scared us. We wanted girls in schools, yes. Freedom for women, always. How can there not be freedom for the source of life? But more war, more battles, more years of dead villagers sprawled by the sides of pine nut trees. Why? Why not the simpler things? Better schools, better hospitals, more plentiful food. There would have been many other things to do. And so I feel like that's a poem I've also written about Palestine over the years, and about Gaza, over and over and over again. All the money that is spent on military might, what else might it be spent on? How much does it cost to buy breakfast for all the kindergartners in Gaza? So, that's the world that poets live in.
Naomi, if I can share a short airplane story. I was on an airplane once with a military personnel who was coming back from Afghanistan. And he just kept shaking his head. He just kept shaking his head as we talked about it. And he said, as if he was telling me a secret, which I think I already knew, but clearly he felt it shouldn't be said too loudly. He said, there really are no militants. There are no fundamentalists. I mean, they're fundamentalists, but they're really just a lot of disenfranchised youth with guns.
Yeah.
That don't have education and don't have jobs to look forward to. They're just disenfranchised youth.
Yes, right. Yes, I hear you. I hear that. Yes. I once sat with a bunch of soldiers at a 5 a.m. gate in the San Antonio airport. They were all heading to Iraq. A few women, mostly men. I asked them, like a collective group of them, and I guess I was fueled by early morning coffee that we were all drinking. But I said, how many of you really believe in this mission that you're on? And I didn't want to insult them and say this so-called mission, because they were putting their lives on the line and, leaving home, leaving their kids, leaving their families. And not one of them said they did. Not one of them. They said, it's a job. It's a job. We don't have a mission. And, I think that it's a real disservice to young people in another kind of way, to constantly be sort of plastering a patriotic mission on their foreheads and pretending that they hearken to it and believe in it. And I've asked people when they came back, soldiers, when they came back, did you have people supposedly on the other side showing you unexpected acts of kindness? And they always say, every day, every day. And it made it so much harder to do whatever we were being asked to do, because we didn't quite understand what we were being asked to do. And you just realize how much lack of empathy and lack of understanding of one another's lives is behind so many military might expeditions. And you think of what that woman said, all the other possibilities of what we could do with same amounts of money. And
yes,
it doesn't seem so impossible,
mm-hmm.
But if you've got this huge entity of military might making it stand somewhere, the fact that these are human beings, and many of the soldiers recognize that these are families too, and these are just kids, and they're those poor boys with the guns that you're talking about, or as in the case of Palestine, poor boys with rocks. How does that all make a better world? Well, here's one other poem for Afghanistan, and this is an actual quote from a little girl in a public school here in San Antonio. My memories live in my mother's phone. That was her response to a question. I was asking this group of kids a lot from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, different places in the world, about memory and how far back their memories went, and if they felt their parents talked to them about memories a lot, or if they dreamed up fantasies around their memories, and how we all fictionalize our memories. And anyway, her dress shimmered tiny pink and green flower gardens, like a tablecloth in a rural 20th century American farmhouse. Something tender you never saw since you were a child too. Pleats and folds along the bodice, tucks and stitchery made with a patience that barely abides anymore. Her hair tightly braided and coiled in circles against her perfect head, with tiny red ribbons at elegant intervals. But when you said memories, her face fell. She whispered, "We left them. We had to leave everything in our house. My cabinet, my doll, my books, my pepper plant, my pillow. Nothing now we knew before. But we have a few pictures. My memories live in my mother's phone." I just found that really searing, to think of a child being plucked from every single item of identification and placed in a different realm entirely. And if I could read just two other little new ones. Green shirt. His mother did not wash it for this. For him to be carried dead by two friends across the thirsty ground of Gaza. That morning, he put it on. She told him he looked handsome, a good deep color for a beautiful, unfolding dream of a day. So many people have talked about what a beautiful day 9/11 was in New York City, the blue sky, the cloudless sky. And in so many places in the world, there are beautiful unfolding days when these tragedies of violence happen. And no, in no way am I trying to equate, this happened and that happened, and therefore it's all equal and it's okay. None of it is okay. None of it is okay. But we can't, as Americans, pretend only to feel our pain that happens here. It's not fair, because we've inflicted so much of it elsewhere. And we've done it without seeing, without knowing, without thinking, continuing to dutifully pay our taxes, worrying about what they go to. We need to be vigilant about the trauma that is happening on a daily, regular basis that's eclipsed in so many places. If you get these kind of Palestine daily updates, as I do, many people do, we see how many people are killed every day walking down the street, going through the checkpoint, leaving their school. A doctor killed yesterday in the old city of Jerusalem. The streets I walked on as a kid going to school, crowded streets, fabulously scented streets, all the delicious spices, all the cooking bread over the fires, the open flames. Yesterday, a doctor killed. It happens every single day there. And so this is called empty. I don't want to see what spilled out. Blue clay jug of dreams toppled at the head of his pallet, found at dawn. Every drop of future gone. I worked over the past 20 years quite a lot in places like Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, and different Arab countries. And numbers of times I would be addressed as the only quote, American in the group, even though I would often say, hey, I'm half Palestinian too, just because I didn't really want to be the only American in any group. I would be addressed as, do you know what your military has just erased in Iraq today? And I would say, no, I don't. What? And they would proceed to tell me about a historic site that they knew of through the Arabic news that had been pummeled and erased on that particular day or week, or a village, a town, something had happened. Always something terrible had happened, and somehow our country was implicated. And because I was there, people would want to tell me about it. And you think about how many angles everyone has in the world, on how many stories. I was in the United Arab Emirates in 2016 on the day that the election happened, and so to experience the Arab response to Donald Trump being elected was something quite astonishing and very touching to me, because people were so worried. They were so worried. They were crying for me, for our country. They were concerned about what would happen next for us. And that was touching as well, because there's always so much going on. And how much do we worry about their leaders? I often think, unless it's something that we're implicated in some way. So did you want me to read another poem or two?
Sure. I just feel like it's such a gift to have this time, and you're being so generous with your stories and your work. So absolutely, let's hear a couple more.
I'll read one more poem.
Okay.
And this is to all of you out there who do good work, who do positive work of care, and trying to help us imagine one another's lives, whether as artists, as teachers, as farmers. So this year, someone I didn't know sent me seeds from Palestine. And I was very touched by this. It had never happened before. And I wasn't such a good farmer with these seeds. And I worked hard with them, but it all went bad for me. And so this is called Palestine Vine. But this is also for all of you who feel that sometimes your good work, your labor goes out and you don't know what happens to it, or it didn't quite flourish. Seeds wrapped tenderly in plastic. One package said white, one red. Hand lettered, mailed by friends I never met. They grew instantly, strangely confining themselves to one corner of the red metal container, as if a metaphor. I swear I planted them all over. Exquisitely leafy vines popped forth, glory and green lengthening overnight. I didn't notice one had twined around the rungs of the table. Today, moving the pot, the biggest vine ripped out, broke off. No, how could I have missed the simple wrapping of the tendril, suggesting happiness in that exact light? Its roots remain, a broken stem. I wasn't evil, but I wasn't careful. This is what happens in the world. Now, soaking snipped vine in a glass of water, feeling the hope and weight of 70 years. Because of course that's how long, longer now, 72 years, the Palestine tragedy has been unfolding and unfolding and unfolding again. And I'm sad to say that even soaking the vine, replanting it, doing all kinds of things, giving it a whole trellis to grow on, it didn't work out. I wasn't evil, but I wasn't careful. And I think one thing that art encourages us to try to do, and I promise I'll stop talking and listen to anyone who's here who'd like to talk, is to be more careful with one another and one another's imaginations and one another's possibilities. And this is what we worry about and grieve for the girls of Afghanistan. What will happen to their potential? This is what I grieve about the kids of Palestine who are poor, who aren't given the same opportunities that other kids might be given in other places, but they want to be, they deserve to be. The kids of Gaza who have to be the bravest kids on earth. I just cannot believe how brave those kids are. So we just have to keep reaching out our little broken tendrils in whatever ways we may to try to reach one another. And you have done that so powerfully, so passionately with your piece. So thank you for letting me respond.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Someone said in the chat, I could listen to you forever. I'll clear my schedule. That was Gabby. I think that we all feel that way, and thank you for being so generous with your time and your words and your thoughtfulness. I mean, what's so moving about your work always is that you capture the depth and wisdom of so much in the simplest story or moment or detail. You have this incredible gift to communicate something so profound about the world in every detail. And that's, I think, what true poetry does, and something that I certainly can learn from you, and all poets learn from your work, I believe.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much. We do have a little bit less than 15 minutes left, and we want to take the rest of our time to see if anyone on the call today would like to speak and share a response or ask a question, or anything that you've been receiving or ruminating on. Yes, Marie, I see that you raised your hand. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so touched and moved. And hi, Naomi. It's such a
Hi,
blessing.
Marie.
I kind of stumbled into this meeting by accident, and I know I was totally meant to be here because this is what is on my mind and heart. And I work with Arab and Afghan students, and just like everything that you wove together, both of you, both in the tapestry of the images in the digital film and the oud, and it was like the lyricism of all of that, and what you shared, Naomi, with just like the foreshadowing of what the Afghan man said and what the Afghan woman said on the plane. It just unraveled me, and it's just so true. You just both are speaking such beautiful truth. And just in the last few days, I've been having all this synchronistic things happening around the children, and the Palestinian children and the Afghan children, and reaching out to them. And so I'll share more with you in an email, but it's just the synchronicity, and as you would say, the constellations that are coming together. And I'm just really grateful. I don't really have a question I can articulate after hearing. I just am grateful for the weaving of all of the stories, and of how you brought the stories and the words and the maps. Oh my gosh, the tearing of the maps. That is such a vivid visual image, and I'm just so moved by that story. So thank you for sharing all of it.
Thank you, Marie, for coming tonight. It's really marvelous to see you again. And thank you for all the work you do with children. And you know, we can't stop those planes in retrospect. We can't stop those bombs in retrospect. We can't stop all the bad things that happen, but we can help the people we are in touch with to continue rebuilding their maps or reconnecting their maps, or believing that their stories could matter or could be heard by someone else. And so thank you for that work that you do.
Thank you so much for joining us, Marie. Would anyone else like to share a reflection or ask a question? You can do so in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself or turn on your video if you'd like to speak.
Andrea, while we're waiting for someone else to ask a question, may I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Because your piece is so brilliant and so brilliantly crafted and so powerful on such a huge scale. When you watch the entire piece, and I urge everyone to watch the entire piece, did you write a lot more and cut it back to what you kept? Or did you just come up with that, like, that's how I go? How did you do that?
Oh, thanks for that question. This is the longest, it's an epic project, and it's evolved over the last 2 decades, really. It started as just a poem here and there, and then in 2007 at Hedgebrook, I started to say, oh, look, this is a series or a collection or something. And then in 2011 at Pangea World Theater, I was able to stage it for the first time. And every time we've restaged it, I had to create a new ending because the world had changed again.
Right.
In 2011 was the beginning of the Arab Spring, and in 2015 was the Syrian refugee crisis. And every time we revisit it, it needs to respond again to what's happening. And so it's been a long, long journey. And I feel like the digital film is really, I don't know if it's the culmination, but it's 20 years in the making in a certain kind of way. It simmered for a very, very long time. And it's also because it's so, I feel so proud of the digital film because of the collaborations in it. I mean, the artists that I got to work with in that piece are just so phenomenal that they also challenged me. And it's funny that you asked this question, because I've just recently been thinking, I probably should publish all this at some point. It should probably be a book of poems, which I haven't done yet. And there are more. There are more that aren't in the theatrical production or the film that I would like to share in some format. And so I hope to be able to maybe do that in a written collection, or even, call it an audiobook or something. I imagine it will keep evolving. I feel like it's one of those projects that you just work on and revisit for life, and hopefully matures with time and age.
I like how people are writing in the chat, a book, yes, exclamation point. Of course, that's what most of us would think of first, just a common little book. You think of a phenomenal production. So a book would be like a few steps backwards maybe, but sure, a book. That would be great. Thank you for answering that. And you give people confidence too, to know you can work a long time on something. It's not an instant. I felt like if I didn't write the piece, the Flynn on the bus piece that very night, I might forget some of the phrases he had been uttering, and I wanted to have them exact. I wanted them to be his actual phrases. So I knew that was sort of an anecdotal instant piece that needs to be written. But you're talking here about writing something larger, a larger horizon of time, which is very important to creative artists too. And thank you also for mentioning Hedgebrook. I wish so many people could go to Hedgebrook. Women could go to Hedgebrook and experience it. I've only been there for 2 nights. I wasn't really on a residency, but I think it's one of the most magical places in the world.
It is. It's extraordinary, and I encourage everyone to check it out. It's a retreat for women writers on Whidbey Island, off in the Sound, off the coast of Seattle. You should definitely apply. It's a wonderful place. Okay, so we have a few more minutes. Is there anyone else who would like to speak or ask a question or share a reflection or story? Yes, Tina.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi. I thank you for such a beautiful presentation. And Naomi, it's always amazing to hear you tell stories and read. I just wanted to say that a lot of what's left out of the reporting of that time, 9/11 in New York, is how much everybody was gathered around candlelight to ask for peace.
Yes.
You know, the rest of the country got caught up in a lot of like chest thumping and drum pounding and, you know, and all kinds of like belligerence. But those of us who, you know, had been so scared and, you know, and traumatized by these towers falling. I mean, it's really like a tarot card, you know, like the tower falling. I mean, it's just terrifying. And, you know, these were things that I watched being built as a child. So it, you know, I mean, it was a stunning thing that had happened, but our response was don't do that to other civilians. Like we were terrorized, and we didn't wish that on anybody else because we knew that the response was going to just fall on average people.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say that like a lot of that, you know, like memory is not reported, but I was there and I saw that, and I just wanted to say that there were people standing for that, you know, right away. And unfortunately, ours were not the voices that were listened to. But I'm so moved by your remembrances and just wanted to add something. Thank you so much.
That is so important what you have added. That is so, so beautiful and powerful to remember. And for anyone who was in the 500,000 person march, I was there in New York City against going to the war in Iraq and saw the placement it took in a newspaper, the big newspaper the next day, like on the very back page, that 500,000 people had said, no, please, no war, peace. Thank you for that most crucial reminder right at the end. If any of you read a piece by Leila Lalami in the New York Times on Sunday, her piece was called, she's a novelist, What We Forget on 9/11, and it relates to what you're saying. There are no memorials to honor the foreigners killed or the people elsewhere killed, the innocent civilians in that war on terror. And there were so many of them. But we all wanted peace. In all the countries, we wanted peace. What I would tell kids after that was there are so many more people in the Middle East who would love you and only want to feed you than who would ever do anything mean or hard to you. It felt very important to just share that love. And a comment, many Mexicans and undocumented workers were killed. Some were not found. Definitely true. Yeah. So many people forgot everywhere.
Thank you for sharing that reminder, Tina. I also was in New York at that time and remember the Not in My Name silent protests and vigils, peace vigils, and of course the protests that Naomi mentioned. There were so many of us asking for peace. So thank you for that reminder. We do have to move toward closing, and we're gonna share some next upcoming events and things we'd like to invite you to. But before I do that, first I want to thank you all for coming, but I also just want to see if Naomi has any last words, any last thing that you'd like to say before we close.
Just thank you to everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting Andrea Assaf in this beautiful work and the Carver Cultural Center in San Antonio. Love to all of you, love to everybody who works there, and all of you who have come. Peace and power to all of you in your lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for spending this evening with us. It's such a joy and pleasure to have this time with you. Really, you're such a treasure, a national treasure, international treasure, and it's just been wonderful to be able to hear you and talk this evening. Thank you so much. I also want to say thank you to the Carver and to Cassandra and to our tech folks, Tanya, Ernie, and a shout out to Gabby, who's the new general manager for Art to Action. So with that, I will say thank you and good night and pass it to Cassandra to close us out.
Thank you so very much, Naomi and Andrea. So grateful for your gifts that you shared with us this evening and creating this beautiful space for us to gather in. I'm just so deeply moved by and inspired by both of your work, and have really enjoyed this exchange, and just really struck by how both of you and your work have this beautiful ability to capture the complexity of these moments in time that, you know, are tragic, and yet also opportunities to really celebrate each other's humanity. So thank you both so very, very much. Thank you to everyone for joining this evening. This has been exceptional. I hope that you will join us for future reflection sessions. We don't have many left, just a few left. So I'll be very sad when this journey's over. So please do tune in, and I deeply encourage you to take an opportunity to view the digital film. It is quite exceptional. You saw just a snippet. You've heard a lot of praise for it, but there really is nothing that can capture how amazing the film is. So I would encourage you to take the opportunity to view it, and then hope for those of you that are in San Antonio that you will reach out and find out how you can become engaged with the process leading up to the creation of the new work. With that, I just want to also extend my gratitude to Tanya and Ernie for supporting this evening and all of the reflection sessions. Thank you so much. And Gabby, so great to have you with us too. Again, thank you, everyone. I hope you stay safe and enjoy the rest of your evening. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future.